He got $18 million. I got a dusty envelope. And inside that envelope was something that changed everything. The morning after my father-in-law's funeral, I thought I'd lost it all. The marriage, the money, even myself. But when I opened that faded red seal, I found a secret that could destroy my husband or save me. Betrayal, hidden fortunes, a key that unlocks more than a vault. It unlocks the truth. What would you do if one letter held the power to turn your whole world upside down? Stay with me till the end to find out what was really inside that dusty envelope and why it left everyone absolutely stunned. If you love stories about power, revenge, and redemption, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next twist. The morning smelled like rain and lilies. Claire Jennings stood beneath a black umbrella outside St. Matthew's Church, watching the crowd of mourners spill across the steps. Her husband, Ethan Jennings, stood a few paces ahead, surrounded by men in gray suits. He looked every inch his father's son, handsome, confident, and already behaving as if he owned the world his father left behind. The funeral of Richard Jennings had drawn half the city. He had been a real estate mogul, a man whose name opened doors and closed deals. Now his empire would pass on to his only child. Claire shivered, not from the mold, but from the weight of everything unsaid between her and Ethan. They had been distant for months, ever since Richard's health began to fail. Claire had spent nights at the hospital, adjusting IV lines, reading to the old man while Ethan traveled for business. She knew those business trips meant late-night dinners with investors, and probably with other women too, though she had never said it aloud. The rain began again, soft and misty. The priest's voice carried through the gray air, solemn and final. When it was over, people pressed gloved hands into Claire's, whispering condolences she could barely hear. Then came the reading of the will. It was held in a paneled room inside the Jennings estate, a house large enough to swallow silence whole. Claire sat beside Ethan at the long table, surrounded by lawyers and relatives she hardly knew. Mr. Lawson, the family attorney, cleared his throat. By the authority of this document, dated April the 10th of last year, I will now read the final testament of Richard Jennings. The room went still. Ethan straightened his tie. Claire folded her hands in her lap. Lawson read the words slowly, his voice measured. To my son, Ethan Jennings, I leave full ownership of Jennings Realty Group, all associated assets in the sum of $18 million, to be distributed through the family trust. Applause rippled through the air in polite murmurs. Ethan smiled, small and satisfied. Then Lawson continued, to my daughter-in-law, Claire Jennings, Claire lifted her eyes, I leave a single envelope to be opened privately. The room shifted. There was a whisper of disbelief, like a collective gasp swallowed before it reached the air. Claire felt the color drain from her face. An assistant placed an old envelope in front of her. It was yellowed, its edges soft with time, sealed with a faded red wax mark. Dust clung to it like a shadow. Ethan leaned closer and murmured, looks like Dad thought you needed a little nostalgia instead of money. His words slid under her skin. Claire said nothing. When the formalities ended, Ethan was busy shaking hands and smiling for photographs. Claire slipped away to the library, closed the door, and sat at the desk. The rain beat gently against the window. She turned the envelope over in her hands. Her fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside was a folded paper and something metal that clinked softly when it hit the desk. A small, rusted key. The letter was short, handwritten in Richard's elegant cursive. To the one who cared for me when I was forgotten by my own blood, true worth lies where your care once mended mine. Follow this to find what is rightfully yours. No address, no map, no clue. Just that. Claire stared at the words until they blurred. Where your care once mended mine. She whispered them aloud, hearing the echo in the empty room. It was as if Richard had written in riddles. She wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. Ethan burst into the room. There you are. Reporters want a photo of the new CEO and his wife. Claire folded the letter quickly. I'm not in the mood, Ethan. Try. This is important for appearances. His voice was hard, cold. Dad's gone, but the company needs to look stable. You can manage a smile for 1 minute. She looked up at him. You already got everything. What else do you want from me? He smirked. Support. like a good wife should. For a moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with 15 years ago, the dreamer, the one who promised her they'd build something beautiful together. But that man was gone. Later that evening, after the guests had left, Ethan celebrated with champagne and laughter echoing from the drawing room. Claire sat alone in the dark hallway, holding the envelope. She opened it again, reading the line one more time. Where your care once mended mine. Her care. His wound. A memory stirred. Years ago, when Richard had collapsed in his office. Ethan had been out of town. Claire was the one who found him, the one who stayed at his hospital bedside for weeks. She remembered the rehabilitation clinic by the lake, the way Richard had said, "You're the only reason I'm still here, Claire." Could that be what he meant? The thought flickered like a match. Maybe this wasn't a token. Maybe it was a trail. She turned the key over in her hand again. It was engraved with faint letters. LS-17, Mom. Lakeview Springs Rehabilitation Center, room 17. Her pulse quickened. She looked toward the room where Ethan was laughing, raising a glass to his friends, basking in his new fortune. Something inside her shifted, quietly but irreversibly. She didn't know what was waiting at the end of this mystery, but for the first time in years, she was not afraid. The rain outside thickened into a storm. Claire slipped the letter and the key into her purse, stood, and walked upstairs without a word. Behind her, Ethan called out, "Claire, where are you going?" She turned at the top of the stairs and met his eyes. "Someplace you can't follow," she said softly. And for the first time that day, she smiled, not out of joy, but out of something stronger. Resolve. Morning sunlight poured through tall windows, touching everything except warmth. Claire Jennings stood in the kitchen, her fingers wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. Ethan breezed in, already on the phone, voice slick with confidence. "Yes, the transfer cleared," he said. 18 million. "We'll announce restructuring Thursday." He ended the call, poured orange juice, and smiled like nothing had changed. Claire asked, "Busy day?" "Always is," he replied. "You should redecorate. This house feels like Dad's. Time to make it ours." Ours. The word sounded hollow now. He noticed the envelope in her hand. Still keeping that thing? It's sentimental nonsense. "It was his final gift," she said quietly. "It was a test," he muttered and walked out. That afternoon, she drove to Lakeview Springs, the rehab center where Richard had recovered years ago. The receptionist searched archives, then handed her a small box marked R. Jennings, 2012. Inside were old hospital files and a small key, engraved LS-17. "Looks like a storage locker key," the clerk said. Claire followed directions to the basement. Locker L-17 creaked open to reveal another box wrapped in cloth. Inside was a letter. "Claire, kindness leaves echoes. Ethan's choices will reveal him soon. Keep what you find here safe. Richard." Underneath lay flash drives and ledgers filled with financial records. Transfers, false donations, offshore accounts, all under Ethan Jennings. Claire's pulse raced. Her husband wasn't just greedy, he was corrupt. She left quietly, holding the evidence close. That night, Ethan returned home drunk and restless. "Why the long face?" he asked. "Just tired. You've been off lately. Suspicious." She looked at him. "Maybe I'm just seeing things clearly." He laughed, sharp and careless. "Careful, Claire. Don't push me." When he left the room, she whispered, "Richard was right." The next day, Claire met with Maggie, her old friend and nurse turned legal aid. Maggie examined the papers. "These transfers, he's stealing from his own company." Claire nodded. Richard must have known. "Go to Lawson," Maggie advised. "He handled the will. He'll know what to do." Bernard Lawson's office smelled of old books and quiet secrets. The lawyer scanned the documents slowly. Ethan's actions could trigger a clause in Richard's estate. If he commits fraud before the full transfer, all assets revert to the secondary trustee. "And who is that?" Claire asked. "You." She froze. He knew this would happen. Lawson folded his hands. "Richard trusted your judgment. Don't act yet. Let Ethan reveal himself fully." At a corporate gala that weekend, Ethan was radiant, shaking hands, kissing cheeks. Claire stood beside him, the perfect wife. Across the room, a woman in a silver dress, Lena Torres, watched Ethan with too much familiarity. Later in the restroom, Lena smiled at her reflection. Ethan speaks highly of you, she said. He says you kept things stable while he built everything else. Claire replied evenly, balance keeps things from falling apart. Lena's smirk faltered. When Claire returned to the ballroom room, Ethan was gone. She saw him outside laughing with Lena near the fountain. The cracks were no longer invisible. Back home, thunder rolled across the mansion. Ethan stumbled in, smelling of whiskey. You're drunk, Claire said. Jealous? He sneered. I'm done being blind. He slammed his glass down. You think you can threaten me? I don't have to, she said. You're doing it yourself. He stormed upstairs and she sat alone in the dark, clutching Richard's box. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid, only awake. Morning came thin and gray, like light filtered through doubt. Claire Jennings woke to the sound of silence. No footsteps, no music. Ethan's side of the bed was empty. He had left early again. Typical. She sat for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the house, then reached under the floorboard for Richard's metal box. The steel felt cold and certain against her palms. Inside were the files, the flash drives, and that second envelope marked Private Vault Access. The word vault pulsed in her mind all night. She had dreamed of keys and corridors, of Richard whispering from somewhere unseen, "Find what's buried before he buries you." Now she was ready to follow the trail. At Lawson's office, she placed the second envelope on his desk. He turned it over carefully. Where did this come from? It was in the same box. I didn't notice before. He slid a letter opener under the flap. Inside lay a typed note and a photograph. An old image of Richard standing before a vault door etched with the logo of First Continental Bank, Chicago branch. Lawson read aloud. Account sealed until my death. Access permitted only to Claire Jennings, bearer of key LS-17, in accordance with Clause 7 of Private Estate Directive. He looked up. This is the original vault agreement. It predates the will by almost a decade. What does that mean, she asked. It means Richard created a private trust outside company jurisdiction, something even Ethan couldn't touch. Her pulse fluttered. So it still exists? It should, but this letter is from 2013. We'll need to verify. Lawson folded the note. Claire, if you go there, go quietly. Don't alert Ethan. He's volatile. She nodded. I won't. 2 days later, she boarded a train to Chicago under her maiden name, Claire Miller. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against steel calmed her nerves. Out the window, winter fields blurred by, bare trees, pale skies, the in-between season where everything waits to be reborn. She replayed Richard's voice in memory. Kindness leaves echoes. Had her kindness really left an echo strong enough to reach beyond his grave? By the time the skyline rose ahead, her doubts had hardened into purpose. She checked into a modest hotel downtown, used cash, and slept lightly with the key under her pillow. Next morning, she walked into First Continental Bank, a tall marble building with brass elevators and guards who looked like they could read intentions. At the information desk, she said, I'm here to access a safety deposit box, code LS-17. The clerk scanned the system. One moment. His brows lifted. This box requires executive authorization. Please wait while I notify the branch manager. Minutes later, a woman in a navy suit appeared. Mrs. Jennings? Claire hesitated, then nodded. Follow me. The manager led her down a hallway to a quiet vault room lined with numbered doors. The air smelled of metal and old money. You'll need to sign here, the woman said, handing her a form. Your identification matches, and we have the access key registered to Richard Jennings' estate. Claire signed with a steady hand, though her heart thundered. The woman inserted a master key. Claire fitted hers beside it, and together they turned. The heavy door clicked to Kim. Inside was a single black case about the size of a shoebox, sealed with tape labeled Estate Private, Do Not Disclose. Would you like privacy? The manager asked. Yes, please. When the door shut behind her, Claire sat at the small table, peeled away the tape, and lifted the lid. Inside lay folders, a flash drive, and one more letter addressed in Richard's firm handwriting. She unfolded it slowly. Claire, if you are reading this, then the choice I feared has already played out. I built this company on truth, but Ethan built his future on appearance. Within this vault, you will find proof of what he has done. Documents, recordings, and control certificates to Jennings Realty Group held under your name. This is not about punishment. It is about balance. Keep them safe. Do not use them until he reveals himself fully. When that happens, the world will see who truly carried this family's worth. At the bottom was a small, sealed envelope labeled Legal Transfer Certificate. She tore it open and stared. It was a notarized share certificate transferring controlling interest of Jennings Realty Group, 62%, into Claire Jennings Trust A. The ink was fresh. The date was the day before Richard died. Her breath caught. Oh my God. The USB drive contained video files. She plugged it into her laptop. Richard's face filled the screen. Older, tired, but smiling. Claire, I know you'll handle this better than I can. If you're watching, you already suspect Ethan's path. I tried to guide him, but envy is a quiet disease. The company is yours to protect. Do not tell him. Let truth arrive on its own legs. He paused, his voice softening. And Claire, thank you for saving my life. Twice, once in the hospital, and once in reminding me that decency still exists. The video ended. Tears blurred her vision. The balance Richard spoke of wasn't only financial, it was moral. She now held evidence strong enough to turn her husband's empire upside down. But she also held something heavier, the responsibility of a legacy. For the first time in months, she felt relief, like stepping into sunlight after a long storm. She stayed another night in Chicago, hiding the documents inside her luggage. She called Maggie from a payphone. Maggie, I found it. Richard left proof, everything, and ownership papers. Maggie's voice lifted with awe. Claire, that's incredible. Are you safe? I think so. Ethan doesn't know I'm gone. I used my maiden name. Good. Come home quietly. Don't show him a thing yet. Claire smiled faintly. For once, I feel like the ground's not shifting beneath me. That was her first false safety, believing the ground had finally settled. Because when she returned home 2 days later, someone had already been in the house. The front door lock showed scratches. Drawers in her study were open. Nothing obvious was missing, but the floorboard where she had hidden the original box had been pried loose. Her heart hammered. She searched the guest room again. The old box was gone. Only dust remained. She called Maggie immediately. Maggie, someone's been here. The box is missing. Call the police. No, Claire said quickly. If Ethan's behind this, the police won't help until I have proof. She ended the call and looked around the silent house. Ethan's car wasn't in the driveway. His flight back from a conference was scheduled that night. Had he sent someone? She gripped the new vault case tightly. At least these documents were still safe. For now. At midnight, headlights swept across the driveway. Ethan stumbled inside, luggage thudding against the floor. You're home early, Claire said from the staircase. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. Conference got canceled. Or maybe you just didn't need to pretend anymore, she said. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? She stepped down slowly. I know about Lena, about the offshore accounts, about everything. It was for a heartbeat, the air between them froze. Then he laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. You've been snooping. Richard left evidence, she said. He knew what you were doing. His laughter stopped. Evidence? Her instinct screamed that she had said too much. He took a step closer. Where is it? She steadied herself. Safe. He stared at her for a long, silent moment. You always thought you were better than me, he said finally. The nurse who became a queen because my father pitied her. I never wanted a throne, she said quietly. Just honesty. He turned away, voice low. You should be careful, Claire. People who dig up the past sometimes fall in. He walked upstairs, leaving the echo behind. She locked the bedroom door behind him and whispered, Not this time. Next morning, Maggie arrived unannounced. Claire, Ethan's been calling my hospital asking questions about you. He's paranoid. I figured. On whatever you found in Chicago, hide it somewhere he'll never think to look. Claire opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the vault case. I can't keep running. Richard wanted balance, not fear. If Ethan's going to expose himself, it has to be in the light. Maggie studied her. You sound like someone ready for war. Maybe I am. Ethan scheduled a sudden board meeting at the company headquarters. He insisted Claire attend for appearances. The conference room smelled of cologne and power. Claire sat beside him, quiet, observing. He presented charts, spoke of new investments, and flashed smiles that didn't reach his eyes. But when one board member asked about irregularities in last quarter's donations, Ethan deflected. Claire saw the subtle tension ripple through the room. Rumors were already spreading. After the meeting, one of the senior partners pulled her aside. Mrs. Close, Jennings, forgive my candor, but does your husband know what he's doing? The SEC has questions about those accounts. I'll speak with him, she said softly. In truth, she knew exactly what he was doing, burying evidence before the storm broke. That evening, Ethan appeared unusually calm. The board loves me again, he said. Crisis averted. He poured her wine, smiling too easily. Let's call a truce, Claire. Start over. She hesitated but accepted the glass. Why the change of heart? Because I realize how much you mean to me, he said smoothly. We've both been under pressure. His words were sugar over poison. She drank only a sip, watching his reflection in the window. He was too relaxed. Her phone buzzed, one text from Maggie. Don't drink anything. SEC raid tomorrow morning. Claire set the glass on. You really think we can start over? Ethan nodded, eyes unreadable. Of course, I just want peace. That was her second false safety, believing his calm meant surrender. He had already set his own trap. At dawn, Claire woke to pounding on the door. Voices shouted, Federal agents, search warrant. Ethan met them at the stairs, feigning shock. What is this? An agent replied, investigation into financial fraud and falsified donations. Ethan turned to Claire, anger flashing. What did you do? I didn't call them. He glared. You must have leaked something. The agents searched every room, seizing computers and files. When they reached the guest room, the floorboard was already disturbed. The agent looked at her. Was something hidden here? She stared at the empty space and whispered, Not anymore. Ethan smirked, whispering as they passed, Nice try. That night, after the agents left, she sat alone amid the chaos. He had beaten her to the evidence, but he didn't know about the vault duplicates in Chicago. Richard had warned her to keep copies. She had left one flash drive in Lawson's care before leaving town. For the first time, she smiled through exhaustion. The balance isn't finished yet, she whispered. The next day, Ethan called a press conference, claiming innocence and blaming a rogue accountant. His performance was perfect. Tears, remorse, charisma. Reporters bought it. Stock prices steadied. Claire watched on TV, her jaw tight. Lawson phoned later. Claire, I still have the original flash drive. It's enough to prove his involvement. Then it's time, she said. Let the truth arrive on its own legs. That evening, she returned to Chicago one last time to secure the remaining evidence. The bank manager greeted her with surprise. Back so soon, Mrs. Jennings? I need copies of the trust documents, she said. When she opened the vault case again, something new lay inside. An envelope the manager explained had been added by legal courier. It bore today's date. Inside was a single sheet. Transfer executed. Jennings Realty Group ownership now active under Claire Jennings Trust A. Balance confirmed. She read it twice before the meaning sank in. Richard's clause had triggered automatically when federal charges were filed against Ethan. The company was hers. The balance inside, both literal and moral, had finally shifted. That night, she returned home, walking into silence. Ethan sat in the dark, a glass in his hand. You think you've won, he said quietly. I think truth won, she replied. He laughed bitterly. The company, the money, my reputation. You took it all. I didn't take anything. You gave it away one lie at a time. He stood, rage trembling through him. You'll regret this. No, she said. You will. She walked past him, leaving him alone with his reflection, the man who had everything and balanced it into nothing. Weeks later, after the dust settled and lawyers confirmed the transfer, Claire met Lawson one last time. He handed her a folder. It's official. Jennings Realty is under your stewardship. Ethan's assets are frozen pending trial. She exhaled. I never wanted this. Lawson smiled gently. You wanted justice. Sometimes that's the same thing. As she left, she paused at the doorway. You knew Richard best. Why me? Because, Lawson said, he believed balance belongs to those who know how to hold it. Outside, sunlight caught the glass towers, reflecting both sky and earth. A perfect equilibrium. Claire whispered, that's the lesson, isn't it? Balance doesn't come from wealth. It comes from truth. Her words would become the line listeners remembered most. Later that evening, she sat by the lake near the rehabilitation center, the same place she once watched Richard fight for breath. The air smelled of pine and rain. She held the rusted key one last time before tossing it gently into the water. Ripples spread outward, widening, balancing, then fading into stillness. In that stillness, she finally felt free. The story wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about a woman who found her own worth hidden inside a dusty envelope. And as dusk settled over the lake, the narrator's voice could close with calm certainty. He got $18 million. She got a dusty envelope, but the balance inside silenced everyone. The day after the press conference, the Jennings mansion felt strangely alive. Journalists camped outside the gate, cameras flashing every time a car slowed down. Inside, Claire moved through the hallways like a ghost, calm on the surface but tense underneath. She had already learned that calmness was not peace. It was armor. Ethan spent the morning on the phone, spinning stories. To investors, he was a victim of misunderstanding. To the media, a man unfairly accused. He could play any role except the honest one. Claire watched from the staircase, a silent audience to his performance. By noon, he came into the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, smile painted perfectly. Crisis over, he said. The board stands by me. Even the SEC's cooling off. You see, I told you I'd handle it. She set down her teacup. You didn't handle it, Ethan. You buried it. He leaned against the counter, pretending not to hear. You always were dramatic. There was something different in his tone, too light, too confident. Claire recognized that sound. It was the calm before the strike. That night, while Ethan claimed to be working late, she searched the home office. Drawers, folders, hard drives, everything had been moved. He was cleaning house, erasing traces. She opened his laptop. Password changed. His desk calendar had 2 words scribbled in red, transfer night. When she heard the garage door open, she shut everything and hurried upstairs. Ethan entered quietly, carrying a briefcase. Still awake? I couldn't sleep, she said. He smiled, tired but sharp. You should try. You look haunted. I wonder why. He studied her. You think I don't know what you're doing? All those meetings with Lawson. The phone calls with your nurse friend. You're not subtle, Claire. She swallowed. If you know, then why pretend? Because, he said softly, it's easier to let you believe you're winning. The chill that went through her wasn't fear, it was recognition. Ethan had crossed the line Richard warned her about. The next morning, Claire met Maggie at a cafe far from the city. The early light painted everything soft, almost gentle. It was a cruel contrast to the storm building between them and Ethan. Maggie spread papers across the table. I checked his accounts. He's liquidating assets, offshore transfers, millions. Claire closed her eyes. He's moving everything before the case hits. Exactly. If he drains the funds first, even if he's convicted later, the recovery will take years. Claire looked out the window. Then we have to act now. How? Richard gave me the leverage, the ownership papers. If Ethan transfers illegal funds under my company's name, I can report it as corporate fraud. Maggie frowned. You're risking everything. Claire nodded slowly. I know, but if I don't, he'll destroy more than money. He'll destroy truth. That afternoon, she returned home and found Ethan waiting in the living room, drink in hand. I talked to Lawson, he said. Interesting man, loyal but not unbreakable. She kept her expression still. What did he tell you? That you've been hiding things from me. And what have you been hiding, Ethan? He smiled. Maybe we're both liars. Maybe that's what makes us a good match. She turned to leave. This isn't a match. It's a fight for air. He set down his glass. Be careful, Claire. You're playing in my arena now. But he was wrong. The game no longer belonged to him. The next morning, Claire received an anonymous email. Subject, "You're in danger." The message read, "Check your accounts. He moved everything in your name." Her hands trembled as she logged in. Every account, her savings, her investments, had transactions she didn't recognize. Large wire transfers overseas, all marked authorized by C. Jennings. He'd forged her digital signature. The realization hit like a wave of cold water. Ethan wasn't just covering his tracks, he was framing her. Within hours, she received a call from the SEC investigator. "Mrs. Jennings, we need to discuss unusual transfers under your name." She hung up before her voice could shake. Ethan had made his move. That evening, she waited for him in the dining room. When he arrived, she was calm, collected, almost serene. He poured himself a drink. "You wanted to talk?" "You used my name," she said. He didn't deny it. "I told you, appearances matter. You're the picture-perfect wife. Who better to trust than you?" Her voice stayed quiet. "You're destroying me." He smiled faintly. "No, Claire. I'm saving myself." Something inside her snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. "You always were afraid, weren't you? Not of losing money, of being seen for what you are." He laughed softly. "And what am I?" "Empty," she said. For a heartbeat, his face twisted, not with rage, but something close to hurt. Then it was gone, replaced by ice. "You'll regret this," he said again. He left the room. She heard the door lock behind him. Later that night, she sat in her car outside Maggie's apartment. "He framed me," she said. "It's official." Maggie rubbed her temples. "Claire, listen to me. You have to disappear for a while. If the feds come after you first, he wins." "I can't run. That's what he wants." "Then at least fight smart. Make copies of everything. We'll leak it piece by piece." Claire nodded slowly. "The balance has to shift, Maggie." Richard believed in it. Maggie sighed. "Balance doesn't always save people. Sometimes it crushes them first." 2 days later, disaster struck in threes. First, the SEC froze every account linked to her name. Overnight, she was penniless. Second, the hospital board suspended her nursing license, citing ethics concerns due to the investigation. Third, the news broke online. Claire Jennings under federal inquiry, her face plastered beside Ethan's smiling photo. The world saw her as the traitor. By evening, reporters crowded her driveway. The same cameras that once filmed Ethan's triumph now recorded her humiliation. She hid inside, blinds drawn, the walls closing in. Ethan had won, or so it looked. At midnight, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A woman's voice came through, hesitant. "Mrs. Jennings, this is Lena Torres." Claire froze. "Why are you calling me?" "Because Ethan's not who you think he is. He used me too, and now he's trying to use my name for transfers." Claire's breath caught. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm pregnant," Lena whispered, "and I'm scared." The silence between them stretched, fragile and real. "Meet me tomorrow," Claire said finally. "No phones, no recordings." They met at a quiet park outside the city. Lena looked exhausted, her eyes ringed with shadows. "He said you'd ruin him," Lena said, "but he's the one ruining everything. I found files in his office. Audio recordings, fake invoices. He's planning to disappear with the money." Claire looked at her carefully. "You realize he'll destroy you too." "I know," Lena said softly, "but I can't raise a child hiding from the truth." She handed Claire a small flash drive. "This has the recordings. He talks about framing you. It's all there." Claire's hands shook as she took it. "Why give this to me?" "Because you're the only one he can't manipulate anymore." For the first time, Claire saw not an enemy, but another woman trapped in the same cage. "Be careful," Lena whispered. "He's watching everything." That night, Claire went to Lawson's office. He was waiting as if expecting her. "Richard planned for this," he said. "He left one final clause in the trust. If Ethan is charged with criminal fraud or coercion, the assets revert to you immediately. Then this," she held up the flash drive, "is enough to trigger it." Lawson nodded gravely. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "Yes," she said. "He already took my freedom. I might as well take my power back." When she returned home, Ethan was waiting in the living room again. The television glowed behind him, showing a news ticker about the ongoing investigation. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "Lena told me everything," Claire said. He laughed once, shaking his head. "Of course she did. Women always stick together when they're cornered." "She's pregnant, Ethan." He poured himself another drink. "Not my problem. You really don't feel anything, do you?" He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "Feeling never built empires. And neither does deceit." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't get it, Claire. The world loves winners. It doesn't care how we win." She whispered, "Then let's see who wins when truth starts speaking." Hours later, when Ethan finally passed out from drink, Claire packed a single bag. The flash drive went into her coat pocket. She left the mansion without looking back. Outside, the air smelled of coming rain. For the first time, she felt the fear leave her body. It was replaced by something stronger. Resolve. Tomorrow she would walk into Lawson's office, sign the documents, and hand the evidence to the investigators herself. It wouldn't erase the humiliation or the pain, but it would restore the one thing Ethan couldn't buy or fake: balance. In the quiet before dawn, as she drove through empty streets, her phone buzzed with one final text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but I'm not done yet." She looked at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message. "Neither am I," she whispered. The horizon ahead began to glow with the first thin line of morning light. And somewhere behind her, in the mansion that once belonged to both of them, Ethan Jennings woke to the sound of silence. His kind of silence, heavy and hollow. The sun rose behind a curtain of gray, the kind of morning that looked like it couldn't decide if it wanted to shine or pour. Claire Jennings parked her car outside Bernard Lawson's law office and sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, breathing slowly, steadying herself. Today wasn't just another day. It was the beginning of the end. Inside the office, Lawson already had 2 cups of coffee waiting. His calmness was contagious. "You didn't sleep," he said quietly. "Not much," she admitted. "But I'm ready." He slid a document across the desk. "This is the formal declaration of asset transfer under Richard's morality clause. Once you sign, the company becomes legally yours, pending verification of Ethan's violations." Claire stared at the papers. "Will this stop him?" Lawson met her eyes. "It will expose him. That's the first step toward balance." She signed. The sound of the pen against paper was almost sacred, a soft declaration that the years of silence and humiliation had finally reached their end. Later that morning, Lawson called a contact at the federal office. Within hours, investigators reviewed the flash drive Lena had given her. The recordings were damning. Ethan's voice clear, arrogant, boasting about using Claire's name to protect my assets. The case that had once pointed toward her now began to turn around. But the wheels of justice moved slowly, too slowly for a man like Ethan Jennings. By evening, the mansion was buzzing again. Ethan had called a private meeting with the company board, determined to take back control before the legal storm hit. Claire decided to go. She walked through those front doors not as his wife, but as his equal, maybe even his opponent. Inside the great room, executives filled the long table. Ethan stood at the head, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "There's been misinformation about our company. I intend to correct it." Claire stepped forward. "You might want to wait on that." The room went silent. Ethan turned, his smile tightening. "Claire, this is a business meeting." "I'm aware," she said, "and as the majority shareholder of Jennings Realty Group, I believe I have the right to attend." For the first time, he faltered. "What did you just say?" She laid the signed documents on the table. "Richard's morality clause, activated upon evidence of fraud, which I've submitted to the federal office." Gasps rippled around the room. Ethan's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. "You think you can walk in here and steal everything?" "I didn't steal it," she said softly. "You lost it." The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Jennings, until the matter is resolved legally, Mrs. Jennings now controls the company's assets." Ethan stared at her like a man watching his empire collapse one brick at a time. After the meeting, he cornered her in the parking garage. "You think this ends well for you?" he hissed. "You'll never survive what's coming." She faced him squarely. Maybe not, but at least I'll survive it honest. He stepped closer, voice low and venomous. You ruined my life. No, she said, you did that all on your own. For a moment, she thought he might hit her, but he just turned and walked away, muttering curses into the dark. That night, Claire returned home to find her phone buzzing nonstop. News outlets had picked up the story. CEO under investigation. Wife inherits company through moral clause. She turned off the lights and sat in the kitchen. It felt surreal. After all the fear, the lies, the humiliation, the world finally believed her. Yet victory felt nothing like she imagined. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like quiet relief, like being able to breathe again. Maggie called. You did it, she said. He can't hurt you anymore. Claire stared at the window, her reflection faint against the night. He'll try, she whispered, but he's running out of lies to hide behind. 2 days later, Ethan's downfall began in earnest. Lena testified to federal agents, providing emails, forged invoices, and voice memos. The evidence painted a full picture. Years of embezzlement disguised as charity. When the warrant was issued, Ethan was in his office. Claire wasn't there to see it, but she heard later from Lawson that he didn't resist. He laughed as they put the cuffs on, saying, "She finally beat me. My father would be proud." It wasn't sarcasm, it was exhaustion. The news spread like wildfire. Investors withdrew, journalists swarmed, and within 24 hours, Ethan Jennings' empire crumbled. But the reckoning wasn't only for Ethan. It was for Claire, too. She still had to face the fallout. The debts in her name, the frozen accounts, the destroyed reputation. Lawson helped her file the corrections, clearing her record. Maggie organized statements from the hospital confirming her professionalism. Slowly, piece by piece, her life began to rebuild itself. One evening, Lawson invited her to the office again. "There's something you should see," he said. He played a video, one of Richard's final recordings. "Claire, if this moment ever comes, remember that forgiveness is also a kind of balance. Don't let bitterness own you. Build something better with what remains." The message hit her harder than she expected. She had been so focused on surviving that she'd forgotten what survival was for. To start over, not to keep fighting. Weeks later, she stood before the company staff for the first time as president. The conference room was packed with familiar faces, some wary, some hopeful. She began simply. "I know this company has been through chaos," she said. "You've been lied to, disappointed, and made to doubt everything. But I promise you this, honesty will never be optional here again. We will rebuild, not with arrogance, but with integrity." Applause rose slowly, then all at once. She smiled, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone who finally belonged. That night, she walked through the city alone, wind tugging at her coat. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the future. But life has a way of testing even the strongest victories. A week later, she received a letter from the prison system. Ethan wanted to see her. Against Lawson's advice, she agreed. Not out of pity, out of closure. The prison was stark and cold, the kind of place that stripped even arrogance down to bone. When he entered the visitor's room, he looked smaller somehow, as if the world had finally weighed him down. "You look well," he said, forcing a smile. She met his eyes. "You don't," he chuckled. "Guess I deserve that." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "Do you ever miss what we were?" She thought about it. "I miss who I thought you were." He nodded slowly. "That's fair." They sat in silence until he leaned forward. "You won, Claire. The company, the money, the name. Everything Dad wanted for me." "It was never about winning," she said. "It was about ending the lie." He looked down at his hands, cuffed and trembling slightly. "Lena had the baby," he said quietly. "A girl." Claire's breath caught. "I didn't know." "Neither did I until last week. I guess she wanted me to know there's still a piece of me out there." "Then do something good with that," she said. "Be honest, at least once." He smiled sadly. "You really think there's redemption left for me?" "I think there's always balance," she said, "even for people who lose everything." When the guard came to take him away, Ethan looked back one last time. "Tell Dad he was right," he said softly. Claire whispered, "He already knows." Outside, the air was sharp, the sky heavy with snow. Claire stood by her car for a while, watching her breath fade into the wind. For the first time, she didn't feel hate, only closure. She drove straight to the lake where it had all begun, the rehabilitation center where Richard had written his first note. The water was still, mirroring the clouds above. She knelt at the edge, tracing the ripples with her hand. "Richard," she said quietly, "it's done. The company's safe. Your legacy's safe, and I'm still standing." She smiled faintly. "That's enough, isn't it?" A small breeze answered, scattering the surface like a nod from the past. Weeks turned into months. The headlines faded. The world moved on, but Claire's world had just begun again. She reopened the community clinic she once dreamed of running, this time under a new name, the Jennings Foundation for Integrity and Care. It provided healthcare for single mothers, scholarships for medical students, and a counseling program for women escaping financial abuse. People came not because she was rich, but because she was real. At night, she still carried Richard's last words in her heart. Kindness leaves echoes. Now she understood what that meant. Every act of honesty, every moment she refused to let fear dictate her choices, was an echo. It rippled outward, touching lives she would never meet. One quiet morning she woke early, uneasy for no clear reason. She walked to the kitchen and found a small envelope on the table. No postage, no handwriting, just her name typed neatly. Inside was a single sonogram photo. Her own name was listed as the patient. Confused, she stared at it, realization dawning slow and bright. The clinic doctor had run a test 2 weeks earlier after she'd complained of nausea. She hadn't checked the results yet. Now she didn't need to. She sank into a chair, the image trembling in her hands. Life. After everything, something new was beginning again. She laughed softly through tears. "You win, Richard," she whispered. Balance restored. Outside the window, dawn spilled gold across the lake. The world kept turning, as it always did, finding equilibrium in motion. And somewhere deep inside her, she felt peace, not the kind that demanded silence, but the kind that came when truth had finally spoken. The first weeks after the trial felt unreal, as if the whole world had gone silent after years of noise. The reporters had moved on to newer scandals, and the Jennings name, once a symbol of luxury and deceit, began to mean something else. Stability, reform, balance. For the first time in her adult life, Claire Jennings woke without dread sitting heavy on her chest. The mornings were simple now. She rose early, made coffee in a small kitchen instead of the echoing marble halls of the old mansion, and watched the lake outside her window catch the light of dawn. The air there smelled like pine and clean water, far away from boardrooms and whispered gossip. The house she lived in now was modest, warm, and hers alone. Sometimes she still caught herself waiting for Ethan's footsteps or the vibration of his voice through the walls, but the echoes never came. Only the hum of the refrigerator, the distant call of birds, and the slow rhythm of her own breathing reminded her she was free. She had learned something about freedom. It wasn't loud or glamorous. It was quiet. It was space. It was the ability to choose stillness without fear. She spent her mornings at the Jennings Foundation, which had grown quickly in the months since it opened. What began as a small clinic had become a full-fledged program with doctors, counselors, and volunteers. They offered free healthcare for single mothers, job training for women starting over, and community classes on financial independence. When people came to thank her, Claire always said the same thing. "This isn't about me, it's about balance." The word had taken on a new life. It was printed on the brochures, written across the foundation's walls, and whispered by women who came through its doors as both prayer and promise. Maggie worked beside her, practical and steady as ever. "You've turned a curse into a mission," she said one afternoon while sorting patient files. Claire smiled. Maybe the curse was the lesson. Maggie laughed. "Only you could find philosophy in a federal scandal." "Someone has to," Claire said softly. Occasionally, letters arrived from people she'd never met, women who had watched her story unfold on the news. One said, "You made me realize I didn't have to stay silent anymore." Another read, "Thank you for proving honesty can survive greed." Each letter reminded her that Richard's echo still rippled through the world. It had started with him, passed through her, and now it was reaching others. Lawson visited sometimes, always the same reserved gentleman, carrying files and advice. "You're making something worthwhile," he told her during one of those visits. Richard would have been proud. "He was the reason I started," she said, "but now I think it's bigger than him. It's about what comes after pain." He nodded. "That's the real inheritance." Before leaving, he handed her an envelope. "For your records," he said, "official confirmation of full company transfer and cleared debts. It's all behind you now." Claire placed the envelope in her desk drawer without opening it. She didn't need proof anymore. She was living it. Spring arrived quietly that year. The ice on the lake melted, and the trees that once stood bare now bloomed white with blossoms. Claire spent evenings sitting on her porch, feeling the baby move beneath her hand. The sonogram photo from months before sat framed beside her bed, a small reminder that even after destruction, life insisted on returning. Sometimes she wondered what kind of world she was bringing this child into. Then she remembered the women who came to her clinic, the lives that had been rebuilt, and the laughter that filled those halls. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was one where truth still mattered. That would be enough. One late afternoon, Maggie arrived breathless with a newspaper in hand. "You should see this," she said. The headline read, "Ethan Jennings granted early parole for cooperation in corporate reform initiative." Claire felt a strange stillness pass through her. Not fear, not anger. Something gentler. Acceptance. "Are you okay?" Maggie asked. "Yes," Claire said. "He served his time. Maybe that's part of his balance." Maggie frowned. "You really believe people can change?" Claire looked out the window toward the lake. "I believe they can choose to. That's all any of us can do." A week later, a letter arrived with no return address. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Ethan's. It was short. "Claire, I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know Lena and the baby are safe. I'm trying to live differently. I took a job teaching business ethics. Imagine that. You were right about everything. Tell our child, if you choose, that their father once lost everything to learn what mattered. Ethan." She folded the letter slowly and placed it in a box with Richard's old notes. The past didn't hurt anymore. It simply existed, a series of lessons written in different hands. That night, rain returned for the first time in months. It drummed softly against the roof while she sat by the fireplace, watching the flames curl and settle. Her phone buzzed. Lawson again. "You might want to check tomorrow's financial pages," he said. "Your foundation just received a $10 million anonymous donation." She smiled faintly. "Let me guess. Balance restored?" He chuckled. "Something like that." When she hung up, she whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, Ethan." The fire cracked softly in reply, and she knew it didn't matter who sent it. What mattered was that the circle had finally closed. Months later, the clinic held its first community celebration. Families gathered by the lake, music playing, children running barefoot through the grass. Claire stood on a small wooden stage, sunlight glinting off the water behind hers. "This foundation was built on a single word," she told them, "balance. Not the kind you find in numbers or bank accounts, but the kind that happens when truth and compassion meet halfway. Every person here deserves that balance, a chance to start again." The crowd cheered, some clapping through tears. After the speech, she walked down to the shoreline. The air smelled of summer and new beginnings. She picked up a smooth stone, tossed it into the lake, and watched the ripples spread outward. Richard had been right. Kindness left echoes. That evening, as twilight had softened the sky, Maggie sat beside her on the porch. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. Claire smiled. "Tomorrow the clinic expands to the next county. After that, maybe more. One step at a time." Maggie nodded toward her belly. "And the baby?" Claire looked down, her hand resting on the curve of new life. "The baby is the balance, proof that life can still grow in the ruins." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the water lap against the shore. The sound was steady, rhythmic, eternal. Later that night, alone again, Claire stood by the window. The moonlight turned the lake silver, and she thought of all the people who had shaped her story. Richard with his quiet wisdom, Maggie with her loyalty, Lena with her courage, and even Ethan with his fall from grace. Each had played their part in restoring balance, whether they meant to or not. She whispered softly, "You got 18 million, Ethan. I got a dusty envelope, and look what it held." The baby shifted gently beneath her ribs, a small reminder that the story wasn't ending. It was continuing, quietly, perfectly balanced. Outside, the first stars appeared, bright and unflinching against the dark. The piece didn't shatter all at once. It came apart quietly, the way a picture frame tilts before it falls. One morning, months after the letter from Ethan arrived, Claire woke to the sound of her phone buzzing against the nightstand. It was still dark outside, the lake barely visible through the foam. The caller ID read private number. She hesitated, then answered. "Claire Jennings?" a man's voice asked. "Yes. This is Officer Raymond with Chicago Metro. There's been an incident involving Ethan Jennings." Her heart tightened, the same old ache she thought had healed. "What kind of incident?" "He's missing. Parole check-in failed 3 days ago. His tracking device was found near the state line." Claire closed her eyes. "Missing?" "Yes, ma'am. We're not calling it an escape yet, but if you hear from him, contact us immediately." When she hung up, the air in the room felt heavier. Outside, dawn crept in slow and uncertain. The shadows were back just when she'd learned how to live without them. At the clinic later that morning, Maggie noticed the change in her immediately. "What happened?" "Ethan's gone," Claire said quietly. Maggie froze. "Gone how?" "They can't find him," his parole officer called. Maggie frowned. "Maybe he just left the city, started over somewhere." "Maybe," Claire said, though she didn't believe it. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who vanished for peace. He vanished for purpose. For several days, she tried to keep her routine steady. Work, patience, meetings. But the feeling of being watched returned, a presence she couldn't shake. When she drove home at night, headlights lingered too long in her rearview mirror. Once, she thought she saw a figure near the clinic gate after dark. When she called out, it disappeared into the trees. She told herself it was paranoia, a ghost of the past refusing to stay buried. But when she came home one evening to find the porch light smashed and muddy footprints by the back door, denial no longer worked. Maggie urged her to call the police. "Don't take chances, Claire. Not with him out there." "I already filed a report," she said. "They're watching the property." Still, sleep came in fragments. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every knock of the wind became a warning. A week later, she received another envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 7 words typed neatly across the center. "Balance comes with a piétiment. Wait for it." Her fingers trembled. The words were signed with a single initial, E. Maggie was the first to see her reaction. "You think he sent it?" "It's his phrasing, his game." "What do you think he wants?" "I don't know yet," Claire said. "But if this is his version of peace, it's a cruel one." She took the letter straight to Lawson. The lawyer examined it carefully, holding it under the desk lamp. "It could be him," he said, "or someone trying to scare you. You've made enemies, Claire. Corporate rivals, people loyal to Ethan's version of the story." She sighed. "I don't want to live afraid again." "Then don't," Lawson said gently. "Fear is his last currency. Don't spend it." For a time, she tried. She poured herself into her work again, determined to drown anxiety in action. The foundation expanded, opening 2 more clinics in nearby counties. Newspapers wrote about her as a symbol of integrity and corporate recovery. She smiled for photos, gave interviews, and spoke about second chances. But every success came with the quiet thought, he's still out there. At night, she often dreamed of the mansion, the marble floors echoing under her steps. In the dream, Ethan stood at the top of the staircase, holding the dusty envelope. When she reached for it, he smiled and said, "Balance isn't peace. It's a pendulum." She always woke before it swung. Then one evening, as she was locking up the clinic, a voice came from the parking lot behind her. "Claire." Her heart stopped. She turned slowly. Ethan stood a few yards away, thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, his face rough with exhaustion. But his eyes, those sharp, restless eyes, were still the same. He raised his hand slightly. "Don't scream. I'm not here to hurt you." "You shouldn't be here," she said. You're violating parole. He gave a faint smile. Guess I've always been bad at rules. She swallowed hard. What do you want? I needed to see you, Alpam, he said. One last time. The way he said it made her hesitate. There was something hollow in his voice. Not threat, but weariness. I saw what you have done, he said quietly. The clinics, the foundation. You turned my father's empire into something good. You were always the better half of this story. Then why come back? She asked. He looked away, his jaw tightening. Because balance, remember? You got peace. I didn't. Peace isn't something I took from you, Ethan. You gave it up yourself. He nodded slowly. Maybe, but I came to return something. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was the gold locket she had lost years ago, her mother's, the one she'd searched for during the chaos of the divorce. I found it in one of the storage boxes before the feds cleared the mansion, he said. Figured it belonged with you. Claire took it cautiously. Why now? Because I finally understood what Dad meant by balance, and he said, it's not about winning. It's about owning the weight of what you've done. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy but not angry. You should go, she said. If the police find you here, he smiled faintly. They won't. I'm leaving tonight. Different name, different country. This isn't a life for me anymore. She wanted to believe him, to think this encounter meant closure. But deep down, she knew Ethan too well. He never disappeared without a reason. Don't come back, she said. I won't, he promised. Take care of our child. Her breath caught. How do you know? I read it in the papers. Congratulations, by the way. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something almost human in him. Regret, maybe even love, twisted into the shape of loss. Goodbye, Claire, he said softly. He turned and walked into the darkness, his figure swallowed by the trees before she could reply. When she finally got home, she sat on the porch, the locket in her hand. The wind moved gently through the pines, carrying away the last echo of his voice. She didn't call the police. She didn't need to. The next morning, Officer Raymond called again. We've located Ethan Jennings, he said. His body was found near the river. Looks like an accident. Car went off the bridge during the storm last night. Claire closed her eyes. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, balance. The officer hesitated. Ma'am? Nothing, she said softly. Thank you for letting me know. The funeral was small and unannounced. Only Lena attended besides Claire. The younger woman held her baby in her arms, eyes red but dry. He didn't have anyone else, Lena said quietly. He made his choices, Claire replied gently. They stood in silence for a while. The priest said a short prayer, the wind carrying the final words across the empty field. When it was over, Lena turned to him. He wasn't always cruel, she said. Sometimes he was just scared. Claire nodded. Fear makes people destroy what they can't control. Lena adjusted the blanket around her baby. Do you think he'd want his daughter to know who he was? Claire looked down at the child's face. So small, so innocent. Someday, but not as a warning, just as a story about how balance finds everyone in the end. That night, Claire returned to the lake. The water reflected the moon, calm and endless. She opened her hand, the locket glinting silver under the stars. For a moment, she thought of Ethan as the boy he must have been long before greed hardened him, someone desperate for approval, for worth. Then she let the image drift away. She tossed the locket into the water, watching it sink beneath the ripples. The surface settled, smooth and unbroken. The shadows had returned for a time, but now they were gone again, absorbed by the quiet. And for the first time, Claire felt not haunted, but whole. The morning after Ethan's funeral broke bright and clean, as if the world itself had decided to start over. The lake shimmered under sunlight, the trees were alive with the quiet song of spring, and for the first time in years, Claire Jennings woke to the sound of peace, not silence. The peaceful kind that breathes, that lives, that makes room for beginnings. She stood by the window, one hand resting on her belly. The child inside her shifted, gentle as a whisper. The life she carried felt like both an ending and a promise. Ethan was gone, but part of him, something unbroken, something innocent, was still here. And for that, she decided she wouldn't hate him anymore. She brewed coffee and stepped outside to the porch, the air smelling of rain and pine. The headlines had faded. Reporters had stopped calling. What remained was her work, her child, and the foundation she'd built from ashes. For the first time, that was enough. At the clinic, the staff greeted her with smiles that felt genuine. The walls were painted with bright colors now, children's drawings taped near the waiting room. Maggie was there too, holding a clipboard and an iced coffee. "Morning, boss," she said with a grin. "Don't call me that," Claire replied, smiling. "We're a team." Maggie tilted her head. "You look lighter today." "I think I finally am." They walked through the hallways together, checking rooms, greeting patients, and laughing about the things that once would have crushed them. For Claire, every small victory, a healed wound, a recovered patient, a grateful smile, felt monumental. This was what balance looked like when it stopped being a theory. Later that afternoon, the mayor arrived unannounced with a camera crew. "We wanted to feature your foundation in our community spotlight," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "Your stories inspired a lot of people, Mrs. Jennings." She hesitated at the name, Mrs. Jennings, but nodded. "Thank you, but it's not just my story. It belongs to everyone who decided to keep going when it would have been easier to quit." The interview took place outside near the lake. The reporter asked questions about the foundation, about Richard's legacy, about forgiveness. When asked if she regretted anything, she paused for a long time. "No," she said finally. "Pain teaches clarity. If I hadn't lost everything, I never would have learned what's worth keeping." The camera caught the moment, the wind lifting her hair, the sunlight tracing her face. It was a picture not of triumph, but of truth. That evening, after the crew left, Claire walked down to the dock. The water reflected the setting sun in streaks of gold and pink. She sat at the edge, feet dangling above the surface, the world quiet except for the ripples of the lake. She thought of the people who had shaped her path: Richard, who had believed in her when no one else did; Maggie, who never let her fall; Lena, who'd found her own strength; and Ethan, whose downfall had finally set them all free. Every one of them had been a piece of the balance Richard wrote about. The good, the bad, the painful, and the kind. They weren't opposites, just two sides of the same weight that made life stay even. She whispered to the wind, "You were right, Richard. Balance isn't something we find. It's something we create." Weeks passed. The foundation grew larger. Donations poured in quietly, some from anonymous sources Claire suspected but never confirmed. One came with a note that simply said, "For the future of what was once lost." She smiled when she read it, tucking it into her desk drawer next to Ethan's final letter. Maggie teased her often. "You've become a legend, you know. The woman with the dusty envelope. People still talk about it online." Claire laughed softly. Maybe that envelope was never dusty. Maybe it was just waiting to be opened. By the time summer arrived, her pregnancy was visible enough that patients and the staff asked questions with warm curiosity. She never hid it. She wanted her child to know they were born not into secrecy, but into truth. One morning, while reviewing reports, she paused and stared at a framed quote on her office wall. It was something Richard had once written in a letter. "The balance of a life is measured not by what we gain, but by what we refuse to lose." She touched the glass lightly and smiled. "I didn't lose myself," she whispered. That afternoon, she held a small staff meeting to announce plans for a new branch, the Balance Center for Women and Families, a place that would provide not just care but education and financial aid. The staff applauded, and Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years: excitement for the future. One evening, while she was locking up, a familiar figure appeared at the gate. It was Lena, carrying a toddler balanced on her hip. "Thought you might like to meet someone," Lena said with a nervous smile. Claire knelt down, smiling softly. "And who's this?" "This is Rose," Lena said. "She just turned 1. The little girl reached out with chubby fingers and touched Claire's hand. "She looks like him," Claire whispered. "Yeah," Lena said quietly. "But she's her own person too. I wanted you to know we're doing okay. I found a job at one of your new clinics. Thought you might approve." Claire laughed. "I more than approve. I'm proud of you." They stood together by the lake for a while, the two women who had once been enemies, now united by something far greater than pain. Before leaving, Lena said, I read somewhere that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without letting it poison you. Claire nodded. That's balance. As the months passed, the baby grew stronger. The doctors said everything looked perfect. She worked less, slept more, and allowed herself to slow down, a skill she had never mastered before. One night, she dreamed of Richard again. He was sitting on the bench by the lake, wearing the same old gray suit. When she approached, he smiled that soft, knowing smile. "You finally understand," he said. "I think so," she replied. "It was never about money, was it?" He shook his head. "Money is just the noise around the truth. Balance is the silence underneath it." When she woke, the words stayed with her. The day her child was born, the sky was clear and endless. The delivery was long but peaceful, the kind of labor that felt like endurance rewarded. When the doctor placed the baby in her arms, tears filled her eyes before she even saw the face. "It's a girl," the nurse said. Claire smiled through her exhaustion. "Welcome to the balance, little one." The baby's hand curled around her finger, tiny and determined. She named her Grace for the thing that had saved them all, the grace to endure, to forgive, and to start again. Maggie visited the next morning with flowers and laughter. "You did it," she said softly, holding the baby. "You made something good out of everything bad." Claire smiled. "Maybe that's what balance really is." That evening, as dusk settled, she sat by the hospital window holding Grace close. Outside, the city lights twinkled like faraway stars, the same skyline she'd once feared and fought. Now it felt gentle, almost kind. She whispered to the sleeping baby, "Someday you'll hear stories about your father, about mistakes and redemption. But what I want you to remember is this: you were born from the truth, not from the lies." The baby stirred, soft and content, as if she understood. When Claire was discharged, she returned to the lake house. The first thing she did was walk down to the water, barefoot, holding Grace in her arms. The surface glowed with the reflection of the morning sun, still and endless. She whispered, "He got $18 million. I got a dusty envelope." Then she smiled, her voice warm and sure. "And inside that envelope was everything I needed." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying her words out over the water. The ripples spread wide, reaching every corner of the lake, just as Richard once said kindness would. It was a new dawn, not the kind that shouted its arrival, but the kind that simply existed, quietly, perfectly balanced. 10 years later, the house by the lake still stood, though its walls had grown softer with time. The porch paint had faded, the trees had grown taller, and laughter now filled the spaces that once held silence. The world had changed, and so had Claire Jennings. She was no longer the woman who had lived in fear of shadows or names or fortunes. Her hair carried silver at the temples now, her eyes lines of wisdom. The foundation had grown far beyond what she had imagined. There were balance centers in 6 states, each one serving women rebuilding from loss, betrayal, or poverty. The Jennings Foundation had become a national model for ethical reform, a name synonymous with integrity. But to Claire, success no longer meant expansion. It meant that every woman who walked through those doors left standing taller than when she entered. Grace was 9 years old now, a curious, bright child with her mother's steady eyes and her father's quiet stubbornness. She asked questions about everything, and Claire answered honestly, even the difficult ones. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace reading, Grace looked up from her book. "Mom," she said softly, "who was my dad?" The question didn't sting anymore. It simply arrived, natural and expected. "He was a man who made mistakes," Claire said gently. "But before that, he was a man who tried to love, even if he didn't know how." Grace frowned slightly. "Was he bad?" Claire thought for a long moment. "No one is all bad, Grace. He hurt people, but he also helped me understand what honesty means. Without him, we wouldn't be who we are." Grace nodded slowly, accepting the answer in that innocent way only children can. "Did you love him?" Claire smiled sadly. "Yes, once. And that's okay too." Grace leaned against her shoulder, and together they watched the fire dance in quiet reflection. Later that week, Claire was invited to speak at a national leadership conference. The theme was integrity in a broken world. She stood before a packed auditorium, lights warm on her face. "When people hear my story," she began, "they often focus on what was taken from me. The money, the marriage, the peace I once thought I'd lost. But what they miss is what I found after. Balance isn't about fairness or revenge. It's about rebuilding without becoming what broke you. The room stayed silent as she continued. Richard Jennings taught me that kindness leaves echoes. My husband taught me that lies leave shadows. And my daughter reminds me every day that light still finds its way through both. The audience rose in applause. Some wept. When the speech was later shared online, it reached millions. But for Claire, the applause didn't matter. What mattered was that the words carried truth. That night, back home, she sat by the lake as the stars reflected across the water. Grace was asleep inside, the world hushed in contentment. She thought about Richard again, his voice, his letters, his belief that decency could outlast greed. She whispered to the water, "You were right, old friend. Balance endures." The surface rippled lightly, as if the lake itself had answered. In the following years, the foundation launched a scholarship under Ethan's name, the Jennings Renewal Grant. It was Claire's idea. Maggie had hesitated at first. "Are you sure about this? His name doesn't deserve redemption." Claire had smiled. "It's not for him. It's for the people who need it. That's what balance means, turning pain into purpose." Every year, the scholarship funded education for those who had survived financial abuse or betrayal, helping them rebuild lives of their own. Grace eventually learned to speak of her father with empathy, not shame. One autumn evening, Lawson came to visit, older now, but still sharp. They sat on the porch, watching the lake darken with dusk. "You've done more with this legacy than Richard ever imagined," Lawson said. Claire chuckled softly. "He imagined plenty." "He imagined fairness," Lawson said. "You built compassion." She looked out over the water. "Maybe they're the same thing." He nodded. "So what comes next?" Claire smiled. "I let Grace lead. She's already asking about volunteering." "She'll make a good one," Lawson said, smiling. "She's her mother's daughter." "And her father's too," Claire added softly. "But maybe she'll carry only the best parts of us both." They fell quiet again, the sound of crickets filling the space where words were no longer needed. Years had dulled the pain of everything that came before, but it had sharpened the meaning behind it. The dusty envelope, the key, the vault, all of it had been part of a path she never would have chosen, but couldn't regret. Sometimes she still wondered if Richard had known just how much that simple act, giving her the envelope instead of the fortune, would change the world. Maybe he had. Maybe that was why he'd chosen her all along. When she went to bed that night, she placed the framed sonogram photo on the nightstand beside a new one, a photo of Grace holding a stethoscope, grinning with pride. Balance, she thought, wasn't a finish line. It was a cycle, constantly restored through those who chose honesty over ease. She whispered into the quiet, $18 million bought an empire. A dusty envelope built a legacy. Outside, the moon rose high, silver light spilling across the lake. The water reflected both the stars and the dark trees, equal halves of the same truth. And in that perfect stillness, the world once again found balance. The years slipped by with the quiet grace of a tide that no longer needed to rush. Claire Jennings grew older, but not smaller. Her life had settled into a rhythm that was steady and kind. She spent her mornings walking along the lakeshore, her afternoons at the foundation, and her evenings surrounded by the laughter of her daughter and friends who had become family. The world had learned her story long ago, but she no longer lived inside it. The headlines were gone, the noise faded, and what remained was the hum of a life honestly earned. It was finally balance in its purest form. One autumn morning, she stood on the porch and watched Grace chase leaves through the yard, her hair golden in the sunlight. 10 now, bright and endlessly curious, she reminded Claire of everything good that had survived the wreckage of the past. The child carried both her parents inside her, Ethan's intensity and Claire's patience, but shaped by truth, not fear. "Mom," Grace called, laughing, "come see what I found." Claire stepped down the path to where her daughter stood holding a smooth stone. "It's shaped like a heart," Grace said proudly. Claire smiled. "Then it's lucky. Keep it close." Grace slipped it into her pocket, unaware that in that small gesture she was echoing her mother's entire life, the instinct to keep what mattered and let go of the rest. Later that day, Maggie stopped by for coffee, gray streaks brightening her hair, her energy still as fierce as ever. They sat by the fire the way they had years before, the lake glinting through the window behind them. I still can't believe how far this all went, Maggie said. 6 centers, a scholarship fund, even a documentary last year. You built an empire out of kindness. Claire laughed softly. An empire is just a word. I built a balance. Maggie smiled. And you did it without losing your heart. That's rarer than money. They clinked their mugs together, a quiet toast to the long road they'd walked side by side. That night, after Maggie left and the house fell silent, Claire opened the drawer of her writing desk. Inside lay the few keepsakes she had never thrown away, the faded photo of Richard, the copy of the original letter, and one last envelope, still sealed. It was the same envelope Richard had given her at the very beginning, now yellowed with time. She had never destroyed it, never even reread it. Tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, she broke the seal one more time. The paper inside was fragile, but the words were still clear. To the one who cared for me when I was forgotten, true worth lies where your care once mended mine. Follow this to find what is rightfully yours. She traced the lines with her fingertip and smiled. She had followed all right, through betrayal, through loss, through rebirth, and she had found it. Not wealth, not power, but truth. That was what had been rightfully hers all along. She folded the paper again and whispered, "You knew, didn't you, Richard? You knew where it would lead." Outside, the wind stirred the branches, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. It felt like an answer. A few days later, Grace came home from school clutching a crumpled assignment sheet. "We had to write about heroes," she said shyly. "Who did you pick?" Claire asked. Grace hesitated, then smiled. "You." Claire's breath caught. "Me?" "Yeah," Grace said, "because you made bad things turn into good things. You said balance is when you don't let hurt win. So I wrote that you're my balance." Tears pricked her eyes, but Claire only smiled and hugged her daughter tight. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." In that small, innocent declaration, everything she had fought for came full circle. Years of storms, courtrooms, headlines, and ghosts had led to this. A quiet home filled with laughter, the foundation still growing, and a child who would carry her values forward. The past no longer defined her. It had been transformed into purpose. That night she sat by the water once more, the same lake that had witnessed every turning point of her life. The moon hung low, silver and tinted, and the surface reflected both darkness and light, perfectly even. She spoke aloud, her voice steady and calm. "Ethan got $18 million from his father. I got a dusty envelope." She paused, feeling the words settle around her. But inside that envelope was the balance, the kind that silenced everything that didn't matter. The phrase echoed back to her in memory, the title of a story she had once lived and now finally understood. And as the night deepened, she thought of all the people who had come through her foundation, mothers with bruised hearts, young women chasing second chances, men learning to rebuild what greed had broken. Each one had found their own version of balance, carrying a piece of her journey with them. Kindness had left echoes indeed, rippling far beyond the lake, far beyond her name. Grace appeared behind her, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, you're still awake." "Just thinking," Claire said softly. "About Dad?" "About everything," she replied. Grace came and sat beside her, leaning her head against her arm. Together they watched the moon drift higher, reflected in the calm water. "Is that what balance looks like?" Grace asked, pointing to the reflection. Claire smiled. "Yes, that's it, exactly. Light and dark, side by side, both part of the same thing." When they went inside, Claire tucked her daughter into bed and lingered by the doorway for a moment. The child's breathing was steady, peaceful. A future was sleeping there, a future born from everything that had once broken. Downstairs, she turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the fireplace. On the mantel sat the framed quote Richard had once written, the words she lived by every day. "The balance of a life is measured not by what we gain, but by what we refuse to lose." She whispered it aloud, then smiled. "I didn't lose myself, I found her." Outside, the wind softened, the world falling quiet in gentle agreement. And when the morning came again, breaking through the horizon in soft gold, it found Claire standing by the window, coffee in hand, watching the first light touch the lake. A new day, a new balance, a legacy complete. The world at last was silent, and beautifully so.